Let's start. No, I guess we will have to wait for Mark as well, but we can start by introducing ourselves. First of all, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming, accepting our invitation for this Wake Up Diaspora roundtable discussion. Today, the main objective is brainstorm, essentially. Brainstorm on the important issues that face the diaspora and Armenia, the whole nation, and discussing ways and means of making it better, the bottom line. Now, I have to also in here announce that this is, even though being held in Merdinian, but Merdinian and ARPA have nothing to do with each other. They just provide this facility for free to ARPA to do all our activities, and we are thankful for that. So whatever is discussed is we are only responsible. We have to speak louder, I guess, because we are being videotaped. So that's another thing I wanted to mention. We are videotaping the discussion, and we will put it on YouTube so the public can see and hear and give us feedback. Maybe they have some ideas that we didn't discuss. Maybe they're more important than what we have discussed. So we'll see what the public says in regards to what we discuss. So the objective of ARPA, as many of you know, is, as the title says, analysis, research, and planning for Armenia. We try to analyze, we try to do research, both in Armenia and the diaspora, find out what are the issues that ARPA can tackle, and then we try to do planning, and we try to help as much as we can. Our main activities, as many of you know, is in Armenia, and we have three major projects actually now ongoing. One of them is establishing a nanotechnology research and development center in Armenia. And we are working with the Ministry of Education and Science to try to first do a feasibility study to see if actually nanotechnology is appropriate for Armenia. And once that feasibility study has been done, then we will try to work on real establishing the center, in other words, fundraising and planning and doing all the details. The second project is we are trying to also establish science fairs in the schools of Armenia. We are again working with the Ministry of Education and Science. We already brought two representatives from Armenia. One was the director of science fair, which was appointed by the ministry to take care and organize the science fairs in the schools of Armenia. So we brought him to the International Science and Engineering Fair that Intel sponsors every year, and that every country can send their best projects to, and the winner gets $75,000. The first, second gets $50,000, and so on. They're a lot of money. And all countries except Armenia participate, because Armenia didn't have science fair, the process in Armenia. So what we're trying to work on that now. Actually, we organized a science fair in 24 schools to show them what it is about and how they organize it and we trained 24 teachers and principals. And so they already have an idea, but Intel, the ISEF, International Science and Engineering Fair, requires that a country become a member first, which we have to pay for. And secondly, they have to have a local director, person who organizes the science fairs. In addition, a country must also have a science review committee, which also has been already established in Armenia. The science review committee oversees the projects and makes sure that they all are according to the rules of ISEF. So that's the second project we're working on. The third one is we're trying to establish small micro businesses in border villages. We sponsor it, we pay for it, and we also guide them to do the business right the first time. We have thus far already sponsored 4 different projects, and one of them is very successful, a tailorship shop in Berkapar, which is a small village in Davush, east of Armenia. And the rest are also doing well. We are now trying to work on other projects, so that's another initiative. Obviously, we also have other activities in Armenia. We organize an annual invention competition for young scientists to encourage inventions and new products. And that's been going on already. This is the 11th year, and we have thus far already received 4 inventions, and we probably will receive some more by the end of the month. The deadline is May 30th. So that's another one. And then we also work with the Academy of Sciences, with the universities, and have many different activities. For those of you who are interested, you can look at our website and have the details. So that's about what I wanted to say. And I have asked Mir Tumajian to be the moderator, so to speak. And so I would like him now to say a few words, and then we can start the introduction. So you introduce yourself, and then everybody else introduces himself or herself, and we start.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Panosian. I'm Miran Tumajian. I know most of you, and I'm very honored to be in this room with all of you, leading technologists, scientists, intellectuals, leaders of our community. So it's an honor for me to be here and do my best to moderate this discussion and hopefully create a framework on how the diaspora ought to improve itself. I think it ought to, personally, and how it could best cooperate with the democratically elected leadership in Armenia, the transformation that happened in Armenia over the past year and is still happening, and how we could find that common path with the Republic, and also, of course, with our brothers and sisters in Artsakh, and ensure their security and their development, their technological development and agricultural and various spheres in Artsakh as well. So one thing that I'd like to just stress from right from the get-go is that you represent organizations and institutions and have affiliations with them. In no way will we permit any bad-mouthing or denigration of any institution or organization, whether they're represented here today or whether they're not represented. That is not the goal of our roundtable. So let's keep it civil. Let's keep an open dialogue, but without any kind of bad-mouthing of any existing organization. So I'm Miran Tumajian. I serve as the Western Region Director of the Armenian Assembly of America. Many of you probably are familiar with the Assembly, nationwide, nonpartisan, nonprofit advocacy organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., with a regional office in Yerevan, established right after the '88 earthquake, and Western Region office in Los Angeles that I manage. And it's the Western region of the United States, not just California for that matter. I'd like to now hand it over to Al to introduce yourself, and we go around the table.
Sure. My name is Alfred Isayan. I'm an entrepreneur and technologist. I've been engaged with Armenia since 1996. It was the first time I visited Armenia, and then in 1999 I made a 40-year pledge that I'll come back every year at least once and do what I can to kind of help develop the economy. We've focused on technology, and I've started many companies. One of those companies was acquired by VMware in 2010, and I think they employ about 150 people in Armenia right now. I'm running a company now called Intellinair that has been, again, in Armenia since its inception. in 2015, and that company has about 22 people right now. And then I've also been very much engaged in the whole startup, like starting the startup conversation in 2011, and have invested in several companies, angel invested in several companies, and I've also helped several venture capital firms, the first two venture capital firms that were formed in Armenia, both as sort of like the initial advisor, but also later on as a promoter and an investor. We'll talk some more later, but my main point has always been, since '96 when I first visited, I figured that the only way to do anything tangible is to be there. And so most of my comments today will be based on that premise.
My name is Seva Gajamian. I have a software firm here in California, and I've been working with developers in Armenia for the past 15 years. I go there as frequently as I can. We currently have about 45 people in the firm, servicing financial services companies here in the U.S. with regulatory compliance and whatnot. In my spare time, I volunteer for Armenian Tree Project and trying to help Armenia with environmental concerns as much as I can.
Hello everyone, my name is Monique Skazlian. I am a consultant and entrepreneur. I have a business that centers around empowering organizations to build their leaders. I'm an executive coach, speaker, and author. My specialty is in women's leadership and empowerment. In 2010, I started working for a Canadian mining company in Rapan, Armenia, where I had the opportunity to coach and develop 10 senior managers of that company to help them develop leadership skills, communication skills, and management skills, and saw firsthand the type of transformation that can occur when that type of attention, training, and coaching is given to young Armenians, especially Armenians who are not from Yerevan. Since then, I've been interested in figuring out ways to do more of that work in Armenia, because I think as more companies are, opening shop there, and Western companies are going to Armenia, I think we need to figure out ways to develop management skills, leadership skills, and also figure out ways to empower the women in that country. For the last couple of years, I've been working on a sort of side project in figuring out how to bring accessible and affordable quality healthcare to the rural villages around women's healthcare. That's an area that's sorely needed and sorely kind of forgotten about, but thinking about ways in which we can take models that work, successful models that work, such as the Armenian Eye Care Project, and doing something similar in the villages and in rural areas of Armenia to give access to quality women's health care. So that's another area of interest of mine specifically. My parents are from Armenia. I was born here, but I've been back several times, and I'm very dedicated in empowering local Armenians, but also figuring out ways to create bridges between the diaspora and Armenia, especially with the young people, figuring out ways to, instead of having a brain drain happening in the country, figuring out ways that we can bring the talent back to Armenia.
I'm Razmik Shirenian. I'm an educator. I'm also a member of ARPA board. I'm proud to say that years ago we established my organization, Scholars for Scientific Education and Culture Development. Established a computer science program, bachelor's degree in Artsakh State University, which is running very well as I hear. We started it there, we handed it over, and it's running perfectly. Thank you.
My name is Gehan Murnetian. I'm the archivist of the Institute of Armenian Studies at USC. I was born and raised in Armenia. I moved here when I was 15. So the work I do presently, or the work we do generally at the Institute of Armenian Studies, we are a research institute. So we our work is involved, not with a lot of the tangible work that you do of creating jobs in Armenia or figuring out particular sectors, but we do research of understanding mostly what it is that a community needs in Armenia in a governmental level, and what it is that diaspora is at the present. I noticed in our questions a lot of mention of diaspora with a capital D, but what it is presently a diaspora as a collective unit, or what it is a diaspora as a dispersion of people, isn't at present quite, I think, clearly understood by our community, which hinders our possibility of harnessing its full potential. So through funding research, through trying to explore the historical past of that entity, we are trying to create some kind of an understanding around of what it is and what its place is in an Armenian nation as a collective and its relationship to the Armenian state. So that's the work we presently do.
Thanks. Mark? He skipped over you.
What am I supposed to do?
Just introduce yourself.
Mark Chenyan. I have the distinct pleasure of serving you today, wine, cheeses, and so
Cheap caterer.
Say a few words about yourself. You do a lot of good work.
Actually, I'm here to listen more than talk. But if you insist on it, basically, I'm an economist in finance. I've been involved from time to time in Armenia, especially the early years. I pulled out when the coup d'etat happened back in 97, 98. And last May, when the revolution started, on May 18, I was there. And ever since, I've been there 5 times, consulting people that I choose to consult.
I'm Shant Shabardamian. I am a surgeon at UCLA, and I'm involved in various healthcare-related projects in Armenia. I'm a product of the diaspora, so I was born here to parents from Iraq. Went to Armenian school here, had been involved in the Armenian community growing up, and yes, that's it.
Well, you do a lot of activities in Armenia, and you're going to Armenia now, right?
Yeah, so we have various research projects and quality improvement projects and other healthcare-related initiatives in Armenia at various levels, from the hospitals to some rural projects to consulting and advising at the level of the Ministry of Health.
My name is Viken Sepilian, and I too am in medicine. I'm a reproductive medicine and a fertility specialist. I'm in private practice here in Los Angeles. I am originally from Lebanon, born and raised in Lebanon. I moved here as a teenager and continued my education on. I too have been involved in Armenia in various projects. I have served as the president of the Armenian American Medical Society for several terms, and currently am serving on the board. This is the largest diasporan healthcare professional society, and it's headquartered here in Los Angeles. I'm also currently the president of the Armenian Medical International Committee, which is an umbrella organization comprised of about 14, 15 different healthcare professional societies of Armenian professionals in the diaspora. And we try to coordinate educational activities in Armenia and in the diaspora.
Would you guys like to
Azad
introduce yourselves too, or?
We're just listeners.
Okay.
We do.
Just I am Hasmi Param, educator by profession. I am ARPA board member. I will be the listener today.
Yes. Okay.
So Thank you for your introductions. I think as a start-off point, I'm interested in Geram's assertion that there's the diaspora with the capital D and the diaspora with the lowercase d. The dispersion that our nation is familiar with, having been dispersed for centuries, not just the more recent dispersion as a result of mass atrocities. But the diaspora is a structure after all as well, and while it's not a cohesive structure by any means, it does exist, and it hasn't reached its full potential in terms of the power that it has or it can have, whether it's political, whether it's technological, scientific power. I'll throw this out there. As far as the distinction between the lowercase d and the uppercase d, what should we here in the diaspora? What should be our takeaway? What is the strength of, for example, the lowercase d, the dispersion, right? And I'll ask Geram, who's a specialist on the topic. What is the strength? What is the weakness of having such a dispersed nation?
In my opinion, it is potentially enormous strength. Born out of terrible circumstances, but in its present situation, if used and harnessed rightly, it's an enormous strength. Because in a situation where you don't have many of other traditional resources, you have this enormous potential capital, a human capital, that comes to the table bringing experience and expertise from global stage, and if used and directed clearly for the benefit of particular entity, in this case being the Armenian state and then the Armenian nation in general, is a huge asset. But that requires the understanding of what it is and how to approach that dispersion and how to gather its force, which, and beginning stages, people try to somehow bring into a structure, but I think everybody can agree that maybe in the past 30, 40 years, that is not the case. Most of the people who live in the diaspora live outside of those structures. Numerically, most of the people who live in the diaspora are not part of any structure. So there arises the question, can the structure any longer speak for the diaspora? The diaspora with the capital D in that sense. Can the people who represent those traditional structures make collective statements anymore when the collective does not belong to those structures? That's where the issue comes from. So, not in order to, we love to create new structures every other step, but not to do that, how does one either bring those people into the structure or redefine it in a way that is more inclusive? Previously, those structures were drawn on very rigid political, ideological lines, which presently have either been outdated or their time has passed, and they need some modification because they no longer serve the larger interest of that dispersion. So how does one do that? Those are the questions. Everybody asks them, but nobody goes deep into them. So I guess we, in our part, in a little way, try to create the scholarship on that, because those need to be addressed. There need to be scholars who talk about this, who write about this. And what is the better way to do it is to look inward into the past. Because these same questions, if you look into the literature, are discussed in Armenian periodicals, in newspapers and everything 100 years ago, 120 years ago, 140 years ago. Prophet Batayan talks about these things in Rostov in mid-1800s. What are we doing? Where are we going? Armenians in India are talking about this 300, 400 years ago. So this is not our problem today. This is in no way new. People have talked about it in their times, and in their times dealt with it in their own ways, which presently we have to look back again and then bring out that scholarship and make it serve our present purposes.
And yes, Dr. Chidini.
Yeah, I will generally agree with him. The challenge to me today is how do we define diaspora? How do we look at it as an entity, a coherent, non-state, transnationally active entity? We haven't defined that yet. To me, diaspora is an entity with a capital D. Diaspora is a non-state, but functioning across state boundaries, so relevant in our current political interaction with Armenia. Armenia is the state entity, diaspora is the non-state entity, so it's the periphery, or it's the marginal kind of entity to Armenian development problems. But we have, to me, the challenge is the diaspora. I hear this, I read about this in some articles around diaspora publications, that there are diasporas. That bothers me, because diaspora itself is an entity in which you have so many different communities. Component units of diaspora are the communities, if we want to define it that way. So it becomes a coherent entity by itself and functioning across state boundaries. That's the wealth, that's the political wealth of diaspora. If we know how to picture it, how to conceive it, how to define it, make it politically valuable entity.
Would anyone else like to add to what Gilham and Razmi discussed regarding?
I'll share a couple of thoughts. I think one, as you look at the 1700s in Calcutta and Madras and all the work that was going there with Israel going and trying to get Russian sponsorship or European sponsorship for. I think one thing that is clear is that it's a mindset problem. I mean, we as a nation, we have a mindset problem, right? And I've looked at this for 30 years, 35 years, looking at it. It's like exactly where is the current situation come out of? What is the environment that actually fosters that type of thinking? With regards to diasporas, I mean, there are certain realities that we have to understand, which is an Armenian in Sao Paulo fundamentally thinks differently than an Armenian in Los Angeles, an Armenian in Boston, an Armenian that grows up in Oklahoma, like myself.
Isn't that the same for state entities? Like Americans in New York think differently
Sure.
than Americans in Los Angeles. I mean,
Sure.
the important thing is to look at the totality.
Sure, but right now, the only point that I would say is that, not to belabor that issue too much, I think we're expecting too much from a unit called with a diaspora with a D, without really a slogan or a
Mandate.
a mandate, less so a mandate, but more so a dream, right? We talk about the American dream, or Israel talks about the chosen nation, right? There's something that's unifying. And so that's one thing that I would say. It's like that. What is that unifying factor that kind of tells an individual that I want to belong to this club called Armenia or Armenians? The second thing that I would say is that when it comes from a standpoint of structures that we have that are non-transparent by nature, that are not accountable by nature, like, I mean, does anybody in this hall or any Armenian in the world know exactly what is the wealth of the Armenian church or churches, or the funds that we collectively as Armenians have access to. Nobody knows that stuff. I mean, AGBU does, to their credit, does put out an annual, whatever, the annual report,
That's
right?
what they do.
At least there's some transparency there, right? The bigger question is, like, what are the goals? So what? You tell a 5-year-old Armenian, you should stay Armenian, you should speak Armenian, you should know our culture, and then the question is why? There's that why, the first part of what I said is the why. The why should we kind of perpetuate this thing? And then the second thing is, what is the goal? What is the goal as a nation? And recently I read Armenia 2041 that was written by Ruben Vartanyan and Aida Nuna Alekian, sorry, thanks. And you can see it, right? The first part is very strong, the second part is very, very strong, and then you get to the third part, and it's sort of like we haven't really figured out, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys have read. So, but I think it's a good start. At least it's a good start to kind of begin the dialogue in a fashion that says, we can't chase everything. We can't do everything. I mean, even most everybody that is here that has actually accomplished anything has done it over there. Has done it in Armenia, right? Because when you're on the ground, you can actually assess what the needs are. When you're kind of in the conceptual too much, then you get lost as far as like what exactly is the goal. And I think that we're seeing that in Armenia today, which is like we're hopefully educating a generation that's kind of sees the future as their own, both effort and then also accountability. And I think that's what I would recommend from a standpoint of conversations, like all these structures that we have as the university is doing these studies, is to stress accountability and transparency. Not necessarily to say that anybody's doing something bad, but most of these organizations are volunteer organizations. And we understand volunteerism has its own limits of how these people, once these become professional organizations that have transparency and accountability as pillars at the foundational level, then I think we'd have a better discourse and better chance to accomplish more, harnessing that potential. So stop there.
Anyone else like to add? One of the points that Galen made earlier was that the lines were a lot more vivid and clear before the recent independent Armenia came to fruition in 1991. Structures were very self-evident. The ideological underpinnings of each structure were very clear. Since independence, obviously, there's been, I guess for lack of a better term, a decentralization within the diaspora structures, and you have niche-based organizations, for example, that focus on specific, policy area, or maybe they focus on a specific project or a cause, and over time these organizations have compounded, and they're very active in Armenia. Many of them are active in Armenia and are doing great work in Armenia. How do you square this decentralization that is so evident nowadays with the more traditional organizations and structures that existed before independence? And should they get along? Should they support one another, or should they just mind their own business and keep doing things as they've been doing? Would anyone like to take a stab at that? Is that even an important question in this day and age for the diaspora?
I'll take that. I think it's very important that the organizations help one another out towards a certain goal. Like when we're running a company, for example, at the beginning of the year, there's maybe 10 objectives. You whittle that down to 3, and you make sure that every department, whatever they're doing, aligns with the top objectives. So if we're each doing our own thing, we're not going to get anywhere, really. So it was a great opportunity for the new government to show some leadership, define what that capital D is, put us on equal footing with the folks in Armenia, which I've heard the Prime Minister say that we are equal, but I haven't seen anything else develop since then. And so the primary goal would be, for example, let's all work together to stop corruption, let's say, right? I mean, that's the biggest problem of Armenia as a nation, in my opinion. So, yeah, we can do each our thing, but how do we align together to address the number one problem, let's say? That's what I think.
I'll add to that. I think the number of NGOs, for instance, there's so many different organizations that pop up with good intentions because they see a need and they want to fill that need. But they're all working in silos. And so, for instance, if I want to do a project for women's healthcare in Armenia, I have to spend predominant time up front to figure out, okay, who's already doing that? And how are they doing that? And what's working? And what's not working? And how do we actually align and collaborate so that we're not reinventing the wheel, right? There's a lot of reinventing the wheel. Again, with good intentions, because we think, oh, you know, here's the need, let's go in and fix it. We want to fix it. We want to help. That's our nature. We want to improve the nation. But if there's no central coordination of all of those different organizations, then we're not using our resources efficiently from the diaspora point of view.
Right.
So I think figuring out a way, and I think that's where the role of the government can come into play, where there's some sort of centralized coordinator database, where, let's say somebody has an idea and they want to go do this thing in Armenia, they can contact one person in the government and say, okay, who's already doing this?
Yeah.
Who can I call? Who can I coordinate with? You know, that kind of thing. Otherwise, you know, our resources aren't being utilized effectively. That's just off the top of my head something. Just to pick
Yeah,
up.
I mean, you know, the database is key, right? I mean, in the book, you know, that you just mentioned, Armenia 2041, it says the network is the biggest strength we have, okay? So we're unique amongst all nations. I'm not the expert on nations or diasporas, but we've got diaspora spread over 100 countries. Each one of us is an expert in something. So how can we harness that? So rather than building it ourselves, which everybody's going to want to do it their own way, if the government shows some leadership and say, here's the database, and I think people will just fall in over time, because that's the official definition, let's say.
Mark had something to say.
Yeah, now, over what an economist's head, and somebody who really gets more involved in a macro level rather than a micro level. For the last 100 years, but let's forget the 100, last 25 years, the diaspora has been behaving on the product-driven entity psychology, which basically somebody says, or an organization says, this is what I want to do, a product, and you go and try to experiment, succeed, fail, and so on and so forth. I think that if the diaspora, a unit or diasporas, that's a secondary thing for me, okay, we have to be market-driven. Market, in this case, is two markets. One is the diaspora market, and the other one is Armenia itself. And unless we get involved in defining what the market needs are, well studied, then we're going to be doing the same thing that we've been doing 100 years, 120 years, 140 years. And we're not going to go anywhere. I think that some people in the present government, from my discussions, are realizing that. And probably somewhere down the line, assuming what battles they choose to challenge, somewhere down the line, whether it's a clearinghouse or every ministry in its own field, okay, absorption or otherwise, if we do not go through these channels, then I don't think it will succeed. Coming back to the little previous comments, I define the diaspora as a fluid entity where molecules or particles and so they just float. 1991 changed that, and now we have a nucleus. And therefore, I think that, again, market-driven, but in the physics side, okay, this is where our focus has to be. I think that we are facing a danger when we dwell too much in the diaspora, trying to unite, get this, get that, and so forth. We'll burn another 100 years, but the problem is not our burning of the 100 years. What is our problem is this, that Armenia is in an existential situation. While we're trying to sort out our things, okay, we may lose Armenia. And when you lose your nucleus, 101 physics tells you what's going to happen. And therefore, I do think that focusing into Armenia, over Armenia, assuming that it's market-driven focus, I do think that we're going to be much more productive. While we're doing that, we're going to discover what the diaspora is all about. We're going to come across and so on and so forth, post-culturation, leveraging all together, and I do think that there is a possibility of succeeding. And one last word about organizations, or whatever the right word is. See, recently I gave a lecture at UCLA. This is exactly that was the subject, where basically I demonstrated that the organizations have miserably failed us, okay? And the success stories that we have are individual. And I do think that taking advantage and leveraging the strength is the name of the game moving forward, rather than try to reform, reorganize, this and that and so forth, which is, in my opinion, unreformable, unorganizable, whatever the right word is, and so forth. So, bottom line, I think that we have to be market-driven and centered in Armenia. In the meantime, through discovering each other, we can strengthen ourselves and move forward.
Can you describe what you mean by market-driven?
Market-driven means the following. And I'll give you in the field of education or intellectual circles so that you will understand what exactly I mean. And I'll compare the university concept and the think tank concept. Universities are primarily product-driven entities, which basically means that if you're a school of engineering, your product is produce engineers. In medical school, your product is using MDs. Law school, JDs, and so on and so forth. These are all products. But the think tanks are a market-driven entities, which basically means that under a roof, virtually or otherwise, probably in our case it should be virtual because we do not have the billions yet, okay, gather together all levels of expertise from all fields, because nothing in the market is unique or bidisciplinary. It's a multidisciplinary issues. That's what the marketplace is. And therefore, the concept of the think tank is the concept that I've been talking for a long time at ARPA and outside, where basically you bring together the experts, the elite, I'm talking about intellectual elite, and look at the issues that the marketplace is facing from all angles, from all sides, come up with position papers, okay? And with that process, number one, the position paper, whatever it is, or recommendation, has some level of credibility rather than haphazard and so forth. And number two, since it's studied from all angles, has a better chance to succeed rather than individually and so forth. And therefore, ever since I've been involved with, tangentially with ARPA, okay, I've been trying to get ARPA think and operate in the direction of think tanks, how they do and so forth. And this is a good experiment, further multidisciplinary, we're discussing, but everybody comes from their professional, highly expert angles, looking at issues, and therefore, accordingly, try to make a difference. But the bottom line is this, that this way we have a better chance to succeed, rather than the other that has definitely failed. Einstein still is alive and well.
Thanks for that, Mark. Sean?
So I agree with the market approach wholeheartedly, but I think there's something that we need to reconcile in that approach, in that Armenia, there's a problem with Armenia perceiving that, or dealing with the diaspora in a market approach. And so the example in healthcare is the following. If tomorrow the Ministry of Health or the Armenian government says our #1 issue in healthcare is tobacco control, yeah? And so we need the diaspora's help in tobacco control. My friend Viken here, who's in fertility, has absolutely no role in tobacco control, yeah? But he still, we always talk about our friends and brothers and sisters in Armenia having the legacy of the Soviet mentality. We also have a diaspora mentality in that we're Armenian, we have to do something, or in the Institute's favorite word, we have to help. And so then we have a pretty big part of the diaspora who is going to sit back and say, well, what about us? We are feeling excluded. We want to be a part of this. We want to, quote unquote, help, which I think I agree, is a terrible word. We should never ever look at Armenia as a place we need to help. So that's where I think the market principle will come up to a roadblock or a speed bump or whatever we want to call it in this, because there's this perception that we have to be all-inclusive when it comes to the diaspora. And you can be hardline about it and say, hey, we have a nation to build here, so we will, and these are our priorities, so we will pick and choose who we deal with or work with. Or we can be sensitive and say, well, you know what, Viken's a great guy too, and he's dedicated all this time, and he goes to meetings 4 nights a week, and we should figure out a way to keep him involved, recognizing that that's going to build inefficiencies in what we're trying to do. So, and I don't know how to reconcile that.
Can I answer that? Probably the word market threw you out. But market is not what really happens in the bazaar. It's not the name of the market. Market basically means what is the situation, what your problems are, and accordingly you go for it. I mean, that's right. Regarding Viken, whether he is involved in one track or the other doesn't make any difference. Okay? There is nothing happening in the world that is not relevant to Armenia. It's part of the population. And therefore, if eventually fertility is one thing, and probably there is a fertility problem in Armenia, I don't know, okay? If and when it comes, okay? For example, if we had a Hoover institution, I happen to be a fellow there, okay? We have task forces within the Hoover. Okay? There's a foreign affairs, which has 17 sub-tasks. There is policy issues, I don't know how many they have, economic issues, 11 of them, and so forth. So it's not something that inclusive, exclusive. The only part the exclusive is non-expertise getting involved in expert required milieux or discussions and so forth. That's the only thing that you exclude. But excuse me, if I have a health problem, do I ask diaspora's opinion what my needs are? Hell no. I have to choose a few 2 or 3 health people, okay, and work with it. I mean,
but I think the reality is that it will, every single, again, coming back to the health sector where I'm the most familiar with, we have issues in Armenia in all the sectors, but there are priorities, and there is not an infinite ability or bandwidth to deal with all those. So yes, there is an issue with infertility or reproductive endocrinology in Armenia, but if you quantify that in terms of the burden of disease, the relative severity of the smoking problem in Armenia is so much more huge that I or the Armenian government cannot even start to think about issue X, Y, and Z that involves Viken-Bohos and Silva. They need to focus on this, and that necessarily excludes a big component of the diaspora and healthcare community, to continue with this analogy.
But the way that's been addressed traditionally is NGOs pop up and then they kind of bypass whatever priority.
Which goes away from the market-based thing, because we're not allowing the government to set an agenda, or the policymakers, or the government plus diaspora to set an agenda. We're allowing for anything to pop up. It's the product-based. So that NGO has that product. We can plant trees in Armenia, and so that's what we'll do. Not because planting trees is number one on the environment's ministry's agenda, but because that's what we can do. So that's exactly, but again, I would, if it was up for a vote, I would vote for the market-based approach, because that's how you knock out problem number one, problem number two, problem number three, rather than diluting out the resources. But how do we address the doctor who says, look, I'm a surgeon and I know how to operate, and I want to dedicate my time by going and operating here 2 weeks out of the month, the year, on my vacation time. You're telling me as an Armenian I don't have the right to put in my sweat and my money to go fly to Armenia and do operations in Armenia.
I didn't say that.
No, but if we're approaching it as a market-based, and we're saying that, or we're approaching it in priorities and whatnot, then we have to, I would think, agree that there will be prioritization, and there will be certain areas where the focus has to be. And every time you allow for the other, for everything else to pop up, then you're going to the product base, which is what you.
But that's not, I don't think that's, I don't
Just
think.
one last comment. Today, Armenia has core problems, right? That's a priority. But that doesn't mean that there cannot be another priority, which is smoking. Okay? The doctors, the MDs, are not necessarily the sources of individual power that I need for court issues and so on and so forth. Just like that. Then the doctor who wants to do something in Armenia and so forth, okay, he's thinking at a clinic level. I'm thinking at the Armenia level. That's the difference between macro and macro.
Micro.
Okay? And because laws of gravity goes this way rather than that way, when you stay here, hard to go there. Another way around.
Talk about macro, Monique is talking about women's health. I'm talking about quality in hospitals, and Viken's talking about tobacco. It's still, it's not possible to do it all. And there needs, in my mind, again, I'm a proponent of what you're saying. I'm just saying that it will, in order to do that right and efficiently and effectively, you have to control or.
Can I interject something here? I think what Mark is saying should be understood the following way. If an organization, a think tank organization exists that is credible by all Armenians, like the diaspora and Armenia, and they actually propose that the priority for Armenia is a smoking battle against smoking, then I think your problem will be solved. That's the problem here. I think that's what we don't have right now. Nobody trusts what the minister is saying because he's not an expert. True, he has done studies, but now if you create an international group of experts that are familiar with everything that is required for health or whatever region you're discussing or studying, then I think that the proposal coming from that group will have much more value, much more weight than any minister. Do you agree?
I don't know. If someone said to me that, if someone said to my colorectal surgeon friend that tobacco is the big problem, my colorectal surgeon friend is going to say, yep, but I got those 2 weeks and I know how to do colorectal surgery, so I'm going to go to Armenia.
Well, we don't, I mean, you don't eliminate that, yes.
Can I interject here from experience? 20 years ago when we were creating the Armenian High Tech Council in the US, we had similar questions, similar conversations. Certain people were in hardware, certain people were in software, certain people were in medical software, certain people were in IC design, chip design. And we have to actually go through conversations of what is possible, right? Not necessarily to the exclusion of anybody. I worked 9 years for a Japanese company. I really, really studied. I've studied Japan, Singapore, and Israel for 40 years, right? And Japan, the MIDI, the Ministry of
Industry and Trade.
Ministry of Industry, they actually said these are the 4 directions that we're going to go. The whole country. We're going to go after robotics. We're going to go after this. There's 4. I remember it very clearly. ICs, and now they didn't say all these other things are people can't pursue it. They basically just said these things we're going to give free loans. We're going to give grants. So what were they saying? Well, we're saying basically that we have actually gone through a rigorous discussion and have decided that these are the 4 directions that we're going to go as a country, and we're going to try to be great at it in the world. Now, taking it from the macro situation to the micro situation, bringing it back to the Armenian case, unfortunately, we didn't have a government policy 20 years ago that said, hey, these are the 4 directions that we're going to go. So we actually created it. The Armenian High Tech Council actually created it, and we said, all right, these are the areas that we're going to go after. This is how we're going to train. We recruited people that could go to Armenia and actually hold 1-week workshops and, basically sharing experiences and just like literally working on the ground. And now, again, recently we've done it. So the IT industry, the reason it has grown so rapidly is we never showed up and said, hey, here's the solution. We showed up and said, here's what we think. This is what we're seeing in Silicon Valley. This is what we're seeing in New York. This is what we're seeing in LA. If you're a designer, go be a UX designer. You're going to make 4 times the money. So as we were sharing these ideas and experiences, people started focusing. It was interesting what happened. Over like a 7-year period, people started focusing. People started actually thinking about starting their own companies and what have you. And then now we have what we have. Now, that is, we're getting into an exponential growth situation in that area. With regards to the medical industry, I mean, almost every major industry, with healthcare is a huge issue, right? Like this whole thing that you were talking about, smoking cessation stuff. I mean, even within the IT community, we began that anti-smoking thing. Not anti-smoking, it was like pro-health type of it. It was an anti-smoking. It was like just like, hey, I would say, like, if you come talk to me, you smell like cigarettes, I'm just gonna not engage. And I was like very funny about it and very kind about it, but nevertheless, the message went out that if you smell like smoke, he's just not going to talk to you. So we changed culture at that level. And I think the last point I want to make with regards to what you said, Hago, it is absolutely impossible to centralize all those decisions, to create this board or this body that says, I endow you as, something useful or not something. Like, look at the U.S., right? Why did the U.S. grow so rapidly? And let's take that model and then look at Finland and look at Israel. Why did they grow so rapidly? There was a loose centralization, not necessarily a dictation. And there was massive decentralization of decision making. To the point when you study the Israeli military, the 18-year-old recruit situationally can make a decision that is absolutely against whatever the commander said. I mean, that's the level of decision making and accountability that we have to drive into our society. And they say, we ask the question, what can the diaspora do? I actually am not that grandiose about it. I just say, what can I personally do? And whoever tells me, where do we send money to? When I go, you know what? Don't send money. You're going to send $1,000? You're going to send $2,000? Don't send it. Just go. Or sponsor somebody else to go. Because the thing is, from 1996 to 1999, 2000, I thought, yeah, give money, whatever. And then a high Astansi told me, he said, you know what you're doing? You're training people to be dependent. And this guy was the guy that was the mastermind behind the Armenian Jewelers Association. He was in the government early on, and he was one of those guys that, I listened to Harvard MPA. So I think these are the things that I want to say, that that's when we say, what can the diaspora do? I think individually we can start asking our organizations to be more transparent and more accountable. Right now, Armenia has 2 venture capital firms. One has $5 million under management. The other one is getting to $5 million under management. 2 organizations. Now, what do we get money? What do we ask for money? Oh, let's go build this. I mean, look, those things are needed. Like building the schools and all that stuff are needed. I'm not saying those things are not needed, but let them do it. Let's invest. Let's make sure that these, they're much more organic rather than, oh, we went and put our names on a building and we built something. And we have those, and last thing I would say is that we have those role models and success factors with the TUMO, the RMAT laboratories. Everything that's happening with a lot of stuff is happening within the defense ministry. I mean, these are things that we can support. I'll just stop at that.
Yeah, so I think Sean makes some great points when it comes to healthcare, and as having served on the leadership of AMIC, which is an umbrella organization comprised of multiple diasporan healthcare organizations, and Chant has been part of many of the meetings. There's a unique snapshot insofar as understanding who the diaspora is and what the motivations have been. Now, first question, who is the diaspora? Now, this umbrella organization has organizations in the Middle East, Lebanon, Paris, Lyon, New York, Boston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and South America, amongst others, some smaller ones, Montreal, Toronto. And when we all get together, we have a lot in common, but we also are very different. Some of the generational differences and indeed geographic and countries where we live in and where we live our day-to-day lives do have a major impact on how we think. Now, many of the healthcare organizations that were formed in the diaspora have their roots to the late 80s and early 90s, especially the earthquake in Armenia was a common ground where a lot of healthcare professionals organized into organizations to go and render aid. Some also in the aftermath of the Artsakh Liberation War. So some of the roots of these organizations, the founders and the cores and the heroes, so to speak, of these diaspora and healthcare organizations were based in going and rendering aid in a humanitarian capacity, in a desperate capacity. So, and we were around for that. We were, even though Shant and I are different generations, we probably squeak by a year or two, but we saw who the healthcare heroes were in that era, and perhaps, that memory stayed in our head saying, wow, I'd like to help someday. Now, the challenge is, and this is an exercise that we as a umbrella, pan-Armenian organization are going through. In fact, Shant is involved in this, is how do we begin to transform our way of thinking from going based on, I'm going to go help. I have 2 weeks and I'm going to go to perform IVF, and We're going to make, Armenia a more fertile place. However, in reality, that's probably not the best use of my time, and I'm very much in agreement with Shant insofar as we are in a transition process. In fact, we've reached out to the Ministry of Health to give us a sort of a priority list, say, and we've done this in the past too. However, perhaps the partners on the other side were not necessarily motivated by the right motivations. However, that exercise is being undertaken where give us your wish list, and we can take that wish list and amongst diasporan healthcare professionals and first of all ask ourselves that hard questions of, do we want to be that sort of humanitarian where I'm going to go do 2 weeks of work and pat myself on the back and say, I did great, and come back and go about my life? Or am I going to shift gears in my way of thinking and say, no, this is the wish list that the government has proposed based on well thought out and well researched facts, and see which one of those wish list items we can actually take on, tackle, and hopefully make a improvement towards that problem.
But I think, if I may, what Al said is very crucial in terms of solving the problem in a different approach than by order or by design or by whatever other means. Now the government has put out issues or problems in Armenia. Now how do we solve these problems? There are many ways of solving it. The government can order, for example, and say, we are raising the taxes on tobacco 10 times. But is that the right way to do it? Or maybe, as Al suggested, educating the people, creating the atmosphere of non-smoking, convincing people that, it's probably better not to smoke. So, but if that's the right way, how do we do that? And who does that?
Well, and those are great examples you brought up, and there are, Armenia is not the first place that, is dealing with preventable diseases. Mm-hmm. And, and I don't know the top, 3 off the top of my head. I'd venture to say it's heart disease, cancer, and stroke, probably, or the top 5. Which, smoking definitely plays a role. And,
in all of these.
In all of these. And somebody made a comment of, our most valuable resources are networks where, I'm a fertility specialist, Shant is a pediatric surgeon. Smoking is bad for reproductive purposes. Smoking is bad for, pregnant moms who may deliver babies impacted. It does impact our fields too, but I personally don't have the expertise on what is the best practices on preventing or having smoking, reducing the burden of smoking on the population. However, maybe in our networks, there are those experts that we can tap into. And also there are, this is something that there are other countries who have grappled with. I'll give you a small example. We talked about fertility earlier, but the origins of my interest in getting involved in reproductive medicine in Armenia is not necessarily just because, hey, I know how to do that. However, it was the plummeting fertility rates where, it was way below the replacement of the population, and that's multifactorial. There's a lot of economic factors. However, a slice of that problem was reproductive treatments, access to reproductive treatments, and poor knowledge and treatment of the specialists that render those treatments. Now, it just so happened that Japan has been going through a very similar problem, albeit for different reasons. And it just so happened that the head advisor to the Japanese government on this issue was a colleague that I've worked with. So about 7-8 years ago, we convened a conference under the auspices of reproductive medicine, however, with the specific target of dealing with this. And that's just an example of someone who happened to be in the network, who was an expert and an advisor to the Japanese government, now made a trip to Armenia to lecture and advise on these, and subsequently has had reciprocal collaborations with Armenians on this issue. Now, that's just an example. I'm not, saying with smoking cessation, there are some best practices. There are similar countries who are going through same exercises with successes and failures, and that's where, if we unite as diasporan healthcare intellectuals, we can make a dent in a major national problem.
I don't know if you guys follow Peter Diem on this and the work that he's doing with Singularity University and several initiatives, Longevity Inc. or whatever. Telemedicine is if for instance we were talking about how can the diaspora participate in a really tangible and impactful way beyond the 2 weeks. I've got 2 weeks, I'm going to go be a hero surgeon, or I'm going to go be a hero IT guy or whatever. It's this telemedicine, right? So where people can be engaged beyond those 2 weeks and continuously. And then this education thing I think is brilliant. If you are interested, you should look at some of the stuff that Diamandis and his group are doing with Singularity University with regards to telemedicine, telesurgery, teleeducation, all of it. But from a standpoint of how that would come about, with Armenia, I've come to the conclusion that if somebody's committed, you can do it. Like in 1999 when the second time I went to Armenia and committed, frankly speaking, there was no IT strategy. There was no government necessarily initiative of, hey, let's engage the diaspora. And Sevak and a bunch of other friends, for years just heard it from me, right? Constantly, hey, we're going to Armenia. We're going to Armenia, and we have tangible things that we're going to do. And I think that's where we have to harness the power of the diaspora. If we wait for the government, I think thankfully I'm very hopeful with the current government. I'm very hopeful with a lot of the individuals that are within this government. But they're also very limited in execution capability. You have to understand. You look at the Nature Protection Ministry's budget is $25 million. That is a small round of funding for one company. And so we have to understand that's where what you guys are doing is exactly how you're going to push things forward. Having your network. I've taken well over 100 non-Armenians to Armenia, and some of them continue to go back, even without me. And I think that is that expanding beyond the Armenian ethnic network. We have networks that we can leverage, and for profit, and sometimes just, I also think that this whole thing of being against doing help is actually not helpful. Sometimes you just go to help, and sometimes you do things that are structural. So you can have the episodic, in my opinion, you can have the episodic help thing that is a little bit of money that solves a problem. But then structurally, I think what you guys are doing is exactly what I would, welcome to accelerate what's happening in Armenia with regards to the healthcare. One last thing I want to say is that, look guys, with regards to defense, like defense of the country, everything that we're doing, all the buildings that we're building, all the people that we're educating, without the defense of the country, I'm talking about military defense of the country, it becomes secondary. Now, when you look at the countries that really advanced very rapidly, were the ones that invested in their military and military technology, because it has, when you talk about cessation of smoking, you know, we have about, between the two kind of armies, we have about 80,000 people that are under arms.
How many?
About 80,000 is what I'm,
Cut it in half.
110?
Cut it in half.
Saying double it.
Well, I'm gonna go based on what I'm reading and what is being, whatever. But let's say it's 50,000. I mean, what we're doing in the IT sector is we're trying to work with the Ministry of Defense to actually plant people that can teach people how to program, teach people about drone technology, these are things that are structural. And by the way, these people, when they come out, they are ready to actually be productive in the economy. And it also helps that none of us smoke, right? It's not all about role modeling. I don't think it's gonna be dictated, I think it's gonna be engagement. So if you guys did, you know, one weekly episode between your members, not every time the two of you, but other members that talk about, you know, their area of specialty, and is broadcast in Armenia, that's kind of tele-education, right? When you sort of show, I mean, I've never been a heavy smoker, but I smoked early on in my life. And when I start seeing pictures like of inside what happens to me, boy, that was like a quick wake-up call. A lot of Armenians, I don't think, have been exposed to that type of education. So I think there are things that could be done that the diaspora can spearhead.
What did you want to add? We talked earlier about a lot of the challenges, not just being Armenia-centric challenges, but global challenges. And to me, that harkens the question, you know, where does Armenia exist in the global realm of things, and does Armenia have anything to offer right now that would not just benefit it from a strategic, from a defense standpoint, from an economic standpoint, but also would benefit humanity and would benefit the globe. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is Tumo, and the brand of Tumo, the vision of Tumo. But where does Armenia fit within the global spectrum, and what can it offer right now? What can it offer based on, and I haven't read Armenia 2041 yet, but what can it offer based on those, you know, what's been, you know, suggested in Armenia 2041? Does anyone want to take a stab?
Well, I mean, what we're doing in IT is, you know, as good as you can find anywhere else. So that industry is growing, and I think it could be one of the pillars of the country, and it's got world-class status. So that's a great offering of what we are contributing or can contribute further to the world population.
Good friend of mine, Vag Bohosian, just came back from Ethiopia, where the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Education had invited him to talk about RMAT laboratories. Now, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but unfortunately, Armenia doesn't have that much exportable stuff. And it's not just necessarily products, it's also ideas. I think Tumo, you mentioned RMAT laboratories. I think what we have to do is, like, we need to go through a really honest assessment of what our capabilities are, what our issues are. And I think I encourage whoever that has not read 2041, Armenia 2041, to just go Google it and read it. I was involved in the early 2020, Armenia 2020 discussions, and a lot of us back then were like, well, you know, you think about in early 2001, 2002, you're thinking 2020, and that seems very far. 2041 is not that far. By the way, I also have to say that we have to acknowledge what has actually been accomplished. I mean, we always, obviously, there's all, you know, as Armenians, we're always looking at what is the next best thing and what can we do, and we're highly critical of anybody that attempts anything. And my recommendation is that when we talk about exporting something, it's to really look at first, you have to have capacity to produce things that then can be exportable. I recently had, everybody was telling me that dentistry in Armenia has advanced and whatever, and I just never trusted it. And recently, this, on my last trip, I go 5-6 times a year, and on my last trip, I said, all right, I need some dental work, I'll go take care of it. And I did, and it was fine. I mean, look, it's almost, with your dentist, you almost have a personal relationship, right? So it wasn't quite that, but nevertheless, it was fine. And it was like at a fourth of the price or whatever that I would pay here. So I think there's some medical tourism that's happening that one can point to, but nowhere, except for some of the IT companies that have succeeded, Tumo and whatever, Armenia is still not known for exporting like the world's best X. And I think we still have a lot of reflection, a lot of focus, prioritization that we have to do to get to a point where we say Armenia can offer things to the world. I mean, it can, and we can, I'll see how it is, we're all higher now. But when you really look at it in the marketplace of ideas and what have you, we don't produce as many patents. We don't even have one university that's in the top 500, even top 1,000 research universities in the world. Forget about the top 100. There are models. Hebrew University, the Weizmann University. These were not top 100 universities when they started, but over a 30, 40-year period, they became top 100.
Now, if you will, let's also talk about the educational system, what the diaspora can do to improve the educational system in Armenia, because I think for any economy to be a good advancing economy, it needs a strong educational system. And we know for sure that the Armenian educational system needs help. And even though ARPA is doing little things here and there, trying to help, but that's not enough. How can the diaspora help create, for example, a university in Armenia that's in the top 100?
I think the minister, the Poch minister was the vice minister that spoke at Armenia. I thought
Arevi.
Most brilliant
she was right on.
presentation.
Arevi, yeah.
I think she was right on.
Most brilliant last weekend. How many people were there?
Yeah.
At her presentation.
Oh,
She was good.
Everybody should at least listen to what she said.
yeah, and since her presentation, the video that we put on Facebook, hers is one of the top watched.
Absolutely. And my only criticism of that organization, Innovate Armenia, is this, that every single person who came basically held education responsible for non-success, but unfortunately the organizers put the education at the very end. Mindset.
So what can the diaspora do for the educational system in Armenia?
Just listen to what she said.
Yeah, so I think diaspora, first of all, needs to take care of its own education system, which is in shambles. Then it could maybe advise or look toward Armenia. There is not a single Armenian higher education institution in the diaspora. There used to be Melkonia, doesn't exist anymore.
There's the Haigazian.
But there's Haikazian, but Haikazian isn't an Armenian university, right?
It is.
By name.
It is.
Still is?
By name.
Yeah, well, why not? So, but
What about anyway?
Valaiwe is in Armenia, it's not in the diaspora. So the diaspora, there are schools closing. There are, there are, 40,000 Armenian students in Los Angeles or something.
It's independent of those things. Diaspora can still do something
Well,
for
it could do, but it doesn't, it comes off as pretentious or something when your own education, when it can't handle Armenian students in their own communities, and then they try to lecture Armenia how to do education system over there. That's what it is. Sometimes we talk about these things, but diaspora can set an example. Communities could. This or whatever it is with dual immersion programs that are happening.
But
And I think those are
the
great.
Jewish diaspora doesn't have universities, or even if they do, it's
There
not.
are, in New York there are.
Yeah, but I mean, they're not.
Right next to it for a month. There are not, but that's not the point that I'm talking about in that case is that there used to be, there is a massive problem, we'll maybe get back to it, but I am a strong believer that can Armenia make it in the world without diaspora? Absolutely. It'll figure things out. It will. I mean, it has in the past 30 years. It's a state. It's a functioning state. And it eventually figure things out. Can diaspora make it without Armenia? I highly doubt it. We have a finite amount of time and that's it. So we do have those fundamental problems within our communities. If still, those are still can be called as communities because of now the dispersion is much larger, but we do have those problems. And it definitely, as Mark mentioned, that it has to become Armenia-focused, centered in that aspect, because we no longer have a tangible identity to cling to, which, as Miran said before, Armenia's independence, those lines were more understandable, right? Diaspora was this older and incubator of Armenian identity of some sort, which was considered under occupation of the Soviet Union and everything. So that created this identity and everything, but now it no longer does. Armenian state is the protector or the guardian of our identity, and diaspora is in this kind of existence in which while it had been getting enforcement with more immigration from the Middle East, from Armenia, which sustains its Armenianness in a way. But that's going to run out eventually. So if the state is not brought to be the center of the universe, then it'll all fall apart. So those issues exist in the diaspora in itself. And my fear is that sometimes by focusing on these things of how do we help, we forego the reality, how do we sustain ourselves. I mean, in a sense, how do we stay around to help? You know, that there is a massive generational change in the diaspora, which is also going ignored. A lot of senior generation did things because you have to do things, right? Ask Yamar. There is a lot of younger generation who doesn't see the practicality in it anymore. You know, it doesn't serve their interest, they won't do it. They won't sit in a volunteer meeting for 4 hours.
Can I make a comment on the education field?
Yes.
Definitely my comments were not in Armenian education. It was just general education as far as Armenia is concerned. What the deputy minister was addressing is complete change in attitude in everything, fundamental. I don't think that the diaspora has that kind of expertise to contribute to that. And the minister very clearly, she was suggesting utilizing all the assets of Europe, Germany, France, Switzerland, and so forth, coming and doing that. So that's the framework in which she presented. She was not talking Armenian education, but Armenia education, the matter. Regarding our Armenian language studies, this and so forth, I really don't know, okay, what the solution is in the diaspora, okay? Definitely Armenia is not equipped to help us at this time. So maybe this is one arena that we have to figure out ourselves. But one thing that, as a founder of one of the largest Armenian schools in Los Angeles, and getting involved in other education stuff for the last 50 plus years, okay? What we have done in the past has failed, okay? And therefore, we really have to think very nicely and clearly, what are we doing? By the way, out of curiosity, because this is the number I researched, apparently, we do have about 4,100 Armenian daily school students in the United States, according to published statistics, okay? And apparently, the average tuition per school year was $7,100. It is higher and lower, okay? You do a multiplication, it comes up to about $29 million a year. It's going into Armenian schools in diaspora. That statistic tells me that money is there. So it's not money issue, $29 million is of peanuts, okay? And therefore, what we do with it is the issue. And again, I go back to the fact that every single Armenian school started with somebody's idea, somebody donating a land, somebody putting together, I don't know, 2 or 3 people, and so on and so forth, and we're going. We really have to sit down and think those things. Are we doing the right thing? Okay? And a lot of times, people, when they get engaged into these things, they put the dollar sign at the beginning. Dollar sign comes at the very end of decision making. Just if you know footnotes. But really, I recommend you to listen to what the Deputy Minister said, okay, last week. It was brilliant, okay? And that's not a word that I use it very cheap.
Can we take a break and then continue?
Just one comment. There's a book by a Columbia professor called Clay Shirky, and the book's title is Cognitive Surplus. And cognitive surplus is folks that, let's say, have retired, or folks that have some time, like they know something and that they can contribute. And his contention is that a lot of good can come out from this cognitive surplus that you know, like so many people have been educated, have gotten degrees and whatever, that they're scratching the surface of both using it and then also sharing it. So that's one. There's a TED a few years ago, I heard an Indian fellow from London talk about the army of British grandmothers that would teach English to the army of poor, destitute Indians.
The colonies.
Huh?
The colonies.
Not the colonies. No. I'm talking. This is now. It's not. I guess it's
now,
still
but
colonies,
that's where it
but
came
no, it's now. And I'll think about his name. But basically, what they did is they created a platform through Skype where these poor, like the Dalits, they're the caste that the lowest caste in India, and so these grandmothers, British grandmothers, would teach these Dalit kids through Skype in community-based, like so I saw some of the computers. They were like actually outdoors, and they were like learning from these grands. So when we look at the Armenian diaspora, right, and not everybody can just go and spend 6 months out of the year there, or 2 months out of the year there, or even the people that go and spend 2 or 3 weeks there. But through technology, I think if there's a sponsorship, like everybody sponsored a family. I mean, right now there's a big issue with regards to learning IT. Unfortunately, 90–95% of all the most fresh information is in English. And we don't hire anybody that doesn't know English. And if we do, we immediately put them in English school. So I think that's one way that many-to-many relationship can be created, where we're investing some of our cognitive surplus there. When it comes to education, there's 2 other examples in Armenia. One is the IB school that has been built over the last 10–12 years, and I mean I think there's a little bit of a contention between IB leadership and the current education minister, but nevertheless that has been based on translating all of the best books from Cambridge and all the top schools, and then actually certifying the IB, or baccalaureates and what have you internationally. That's one example. Of course, the other example that is not necessarily so popular is, of course, what's happening with Dilijan. How do you take those models and, of course, Teach for Armenia, where you can, infuse it to the rest of the country? I think those are things that are actually happening in Armenia that we can support.
But the main pillars of education in Armenia are the universities. and the universities are not doing a good job of producing the right people.
It's all of it.
That's where the main problem is. How can we address that problem, and how can the diaspora have a role? I know Europe and the United Nations and everything else can help and will probably help, but then also the diaspora can do something. For example, some people can go and as professors and teach. That will be a helpful.
Individuals, not
Hmm?
that's individuals.
That's individuals, but still from the diaspora.
And not necessarily only from the diaspora, but non-Armenians as well.
Yeah,
are part of
why
that
not?
cognitive surplus.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Sheik.
My general conclusion over the years is that development of Armenia, if we're concerned primarily about the development of Armenia, it goes beyond the scope of particular issues. It is like a broader concept of development of a state building process. We are basically building our state. It's just development is a state building process in Armenia, and it's not. It's an inward looking process also. It's inward oriented. Therefore, Armenia should develop itself. That's the best theory I can conclude. It's inward looking, inward oriented policy issues that should come from the government. Diaspora only is a marginal thing. It can contribute. Contribution is not it. It's just a contribution. So diaspora is just the outside.
It's a consultant.
Developing entity. And development is a broader concept. It should entail the idea of human development that includes all aspects of human life, beyond just the scope of medicine or education or technology. So this is the theory that we should look at and understand what is development of Armenia, how do we build our state, and how do we build the state from within, not dependent on outside, dependent on diaspora, or even dependent on international political situation or regional political situation. The focus is within the country. That's the aim of human condition that we have to look at. Human life in Armenia. That's what we should look at and focus on that idea of human development as a state building process.
I would suggest that we take a break. Everybody benefits from the goodies that Mark provided here, and then also discuss amongst us what we discuss now, and then come back and try to see what is the next step that we can do, this group, or maybe some more people added on it, but what should be discussed next, or how should we proceed from here and on. So let's take a break and stretch our legs and come back.